Tonight on the Midnight Drive, we conclude our journey through California, a state built on reinvention, a state where people arrive searching for fame, fortune, purpose, connection, enlightenment, visibility, and sometimes an entirely new version of themselves. This week, we've explored dreamers, celebrities, haunted hotels, spiritual seekers, desert mystics, and the strange emotional gravity that seems to pull people westward. But beneath all of it sits a larger question. What happens when a place teaches people that they can become somebody else? Tonight, we explore California itself, ambition, performance, loneliness, transformation, collapse, the mythology of starting over, and why the Pacific coastline may hold the most important lesson of all. Because not everything is asking to be reinvented. California wasn't the first place people went searching for a better life, but it may have been the first place that turned reinvention into part of its identity. Because long before Hollywood, long before Silicon Valley, long before influencers, sound baths, and celebrity culture, California was already selling a dream. Go west. Start over. Become something new. That idea runs so deep through the history of the state that it's almost impossible to separate California from the mythology surrounding it. The gold rush may be one of the clearest examples. Thousands upon thousands of people uprooted their lives chasing the possibility that somewhere beyond the horizon was a different future. A richer future, a more successful future, a future where circumstances could be rewritten. And maybe that's the first truly California idea. You are not stuck being who you are. For a lot of people, that's an incredibly hopeful thought. People escape bad situations. People reinvent careers. People discover talents they never knew they had. People find communities they never would have found otherwise. The ability to change your life is a beautiful thing. But every beautiful idea casts a shadow eventually. Because if transformation becomes part of a culture, people start believing they should always be transforming, always improving, always leveling up, always becoming something more. And that's where California starts becoming psychologically interesting, because at some point, reinvention stops being an opportunity and starts becoming an expectation. You can feel traces of that expectation all over the state. Hollywood says, become famous. Silicon Valley says, build something revolutionary. Wellness culture says, become enlightened. Fitness culture says, become optimized. Influencer culture says, become visible. Everybody is becoming something. Or at least trying to. Or at least pretending to. And that's where California starts feeling different from most places, because identity itself becomes flexible there. Negotiable, customizable. You can arrive as one version of yourself and leave as another. At least that's the promise. The reality is usually much, much messier than that, because real transformation does not happen overnight. That's one of the observations that kept surfacing throughout this entire week. California loves the mythology of sudden success. The overnight actor, the discovered musician, the startup billionaire, the influencer who explodes into fame, the spiritual awakening, the life-changing retreat, the breakthrough moment, the montage, the movie version. But real life rarely follows that script. Most meaningful change happens very slowly, painfully, incrementally, behind the scenes. And maybe that's one reason California creates so much emotional tension. The mythology moves faster than reality. People arrive carrying expectations built from movies, from social media, from stories, from culture, folklore. Then they collide with the actual machinery underneath of it all. Years of work, networking, failure, persistence, luck, timing, invisible effort. The dream itself isn't necessarily false, but the timeline usually is. That's a distinction that you need to pay attention to, because California attracts some of the most ambitious people in the world. Artists, entrepreneurs, writers, musicians, filmmakers, inventors, dreamers, people willing to risk comfort for possibility. There's something admirable about that, isn't there? A willingness to bet on yourself, to step into uncertainty and just see what happens. But ambition carries its own risks, especially when people begin measuring their worth against outcomes they can't fully control. Let's break it down. Success, recognition, visibility, connection, status. Those are all things that can become moving targets. You reach one goal, and another immediately appears beyond it. The finish line keeps moving. The transformation never feels complete. And eventually, people start asking a question California doesn't always answer very well. What happens when you get everything you thought that you wanted, and you're still the same person underneath? It's not a Hollywood question, is it? That is the question that sits at the core of our humanity. But California seems uniquely positioned to amplify it, because the state specializes in external transformation. New careers, new images, new opportunities, new lifestyles, new versions of yourself. Yet, beneath all of that remains the same nervous system. The same fears, the same insecurities, the same longing for meaning. That's why this week's stories connected together so naturally. The Cecil Hotel, Hollywood Forever, the Integratron. On the surface, those places have almost nothing in common, but underneath, all three are connected by people searching for transformation. Some searching for success. Some searching for immortality. Some searching for transcendence. Different destinations, but the same longing. And maybe that's the emotional center of California itself. Not the fame, not the wealth, not the spirituality, not even the reinvention. It's the longing. The belief deep down that somewhere ahead exists a version of life that finally makes sense to me. A version where the pieces fit together perfectly. A version where fulfillment finally arrives. A version where the search finally ends. California didn't invent that longing. Human beings have carried it forever. But you want to know what? California may have built an entire cultural identity around chasing that. What do you make of this? Let us know in the comments below. You're listening to The Midnight Drive. Everybody wants to be seen. Everybody wants to be loved. Everybody wants to be enjoyed. Not famous necessarily, not rich, not powerful, just seen, understood, recognized, valued. That's one of the strongest feelings that I get whenever I think about California. Because beneath all of the glamour, beneath all of the wealth, beneath the beaches and mountains and palm trees, there's this constant current of people trying so hard to matter. Trying to establish a place for themselves, trying to carve out an identity in a state overflowing with ambition. And nowhere is that more obvious than Los Angeles. Los Angeles is fascinating because it's simultaneously one of the most exciting places I've ever been, and also one of the most emotionally exhausting. Both things can be true. In fact, I think they have to be, because excitement creates gravity. It attracts people. And California attracts people at a scale that few places can match. Artists, dreamers, builders, creators, performers, people carrying enormous hopes. And hopes are beautiful. Having hopes and dreams is a beautiful, beautiful thing. But when millions of people arrive carrying hopes and dreams into the same geographic area, something weird starts to happen. Suddenly, competition becomes atmosphere. It's not hostile competition necessarily. It's just omnipresent. You can feel it. In conversations, in networking events, in restaurants, in coffee shops, in ride shares, everywhere. One of the things I've always found fascinating about Los Angeles is how quickly ordinary conversations can transform into introductions. Then, introductions become resumes. Then resumes become pitches. Not because people are bad, not because people are fake, but because people are searching. The Uber driver wants to be a singer. The waiter wants to write screenplays. The bartender has a podcast. The musician has a startup. The startup founder is working on a documentary. Everybody has something. Everybody is building something. Everybody is becoming something. And after a while, you start noticing the emotional weight that comes with that. Because when identity becomes tied to future success, the present starts feeling temporary. Like life hasn't even started yet. Like happiness is waiting somewhere over the next hill. The next project, the next opportunity, the next connection, the next breakthrough. And California is uniquely equipped to feed that feeling. Because every day you can see examples of people who seemingly made it. Celebrities, executives, influencers, entrepreneurs, artists, people living versions of life that many other people desperately want. And sadly, comparison becomes almost impossible to avoid. That's one of the hidden costs of visibility. You start measuring yourself against people whose lives you don't fully understand. People whose struggles are invisible. People whose public image may have very little to do with reality. And that's where California starts becoming psychologically complicated. Because the state doesn't simply produce dreams. it produces performances. And again, it's not necessarily a dishonest performance. Professional performances, social performances, aspirational performances, curated versions of self. The version that goes on Instagram. The version that walks into the networking event. The version that introduces itself at the party. The version that knows exactly what it's trying to become. And here's the weird part. Sometimes those performances actually help people. Seriously. Sometimes acting confident helps build real confidence. Sometimes trying a new identity helps people discover who they actually are. Sometimes reinvention genuinely works. I would say that it works so often that if you've never tried it, I encourage you, the next time that you're feeling nervous or afraid in a social situation, create a character in your mind and just declare part of that character's personality is that they are overflowing with confidence. Just put that character on for an hour and see what it does for you. You'll learn some pretty amazing things about yourself. I digress. That's why California remains so magnetic, because transformation does happen there. I don't know why I almost said it does not happen there. Otherwise, why would I be making this episode? Because transformation does happen there. People change, lives change, careers change, entire futures change. The dream is not imaginary. It's just incomplete. Because what rarely gets discussed is the emotional toll of constantly managing a future version of yourself. The pressure, the uncertainty, the comparison, the waiting. The feeling that maybe everybody else understands the game a little bit better than you do. And that's where the loneliness starts sneaking in, which is another contradiction California seems to specialize in. How can a place be so crowded and still feel so ridiculously lonely? Because being surrounded by people isn't the same thing as being connected to people, especially when everybody is carrying some version of look at me, choose me, notice me, remember me. That's not arrogance. It's vulnerability. People want significance. We want belonging. We want confirmation that our efforts matter, that our lives matter, that we're not invisible. People want to be chosen. California simply places those desires under a spotlight. And that might be why the state feels so emotionally intense compared to most places in the United States. The longing becomes visible. You can see it. You can hear it. You can feel it moving through conversations, through billboards, through ads, through auditions, through social media. My word. People are so transparent about themselves on social media, even when they think that they're putting on a good front. Through entire industries built around attention. Everybody wants to be seen. The question that California keeps asking is, what are you willing to become in order to be seen? Spin that around in your mind for just a moment. What do you want and are willing to become in order to be seen? A lot of times it's not even what do you want to become. It very quickly can change from want to willing to. And that's where the story starts getting complicated. You're listening to The Midnight Drive. Every transformation has a cost. Think about that. Every transformation has a cost. And that's probably the part California is least interested in advertising about itself. The arrival gets attention. The success story gets the documentary. The breakthrough gets the headline. Nobody makes a movie about the 10 years that happened beforehand. The uncertainty, the rejection, the second jobs, the self-doubt, the loneliness. The moments where people quietly wonder whether they made a terrible mistake. That's the hidden side of reinvention. Because transformation sounds exciting when you're looking at the destination. It feels very different when you're living inside the process. And California is full of people living inside the process. Actors waiting for callbacks for auditions, musicians waiting for opportunities, writers waiting for responses, entrepreneurs waiting for investment, creators waiting for an audience. Everybody is waiting for something. And waiting can be emotionally exhausting, especially when the dream itself feels close enough to touch. That's one of the strange psychological effects California has on people. Success feels visible there. You can literally drive past it. The mansions, the studios, the premieres, the billboards, the celebrity restaurants, the private parties, the gated neighborhoods, the symbols are everywhere. The dream feels so tangible. And that makes failure feel personal. Because of success is right there. Why hasn't it happened for me yet? That's where people start becoming vulnerable to a dangerous story. The story that success belongs to people who are somehow fundamentally different. More talented, more attractive, more connected, more special. But most of the time, that's not really how things work. Again, the reality is actually quite a bit messier. Luck, timing, relationships, persistence, geography, opportunity. 1,000 variables that nobody fully controls. The problem is that uncertainty doesn't make for very satisfying mythology. So people simplify it. They create scripts, formulas, blueprints. And that's maybe one of the most dangerous things that California exports culturally. It's also one of my biggest personal pet peeves. The dream script. The idea that success unfolds in a predictable sequence. A method. Move to California, work hard, get discovered, make it, live happily ever after. Step 3, profit, right? Right? The script feels comforting because it turns uncertainty into something very manageable. The problem is that life rarely does follow scripts. And usually it's the people that are struggling after a big win or a big success that are the same ones that are writing these scripts and then selling these scripts to dreamers. It's an illusion of control. People invest in those, and they follow that roadmap and discover there are entire chapters of the book missing. The setbacks, the randomness, the emotional cost, the years that nobody talks about. And when reality doesn't match the script, people often blame themselves. It's always kind of baffling to me when I hear about people who are entertainment gurus of sorts. And they'll sell you a class. And they'll give you the exact step-by-step of how to do it. I guess their way of explaining how they did it. And now you can do it. And they always seem to leave out the weird post that they made that was last second on a whim. They made the video. They uploaded it, they went to bed, and then the next day it had 8 million views. They might take credit for that 8 million views, and they'll usually package it like something along the lines of, you need to be posting on TikTok or Reels every single day. And here's an example of exactly why you need to do that. Because if you post enough, usually it's always a volume game. If you post enough volume, then it's a numbers game. Eventually something's going to take off. And so that is their way of taking credit for doing a last minute post and that being a post that hits 8 million. However, they had zero control in that particular instance. Lots of sidebars today. I'm not even sorry. I love it. I love it. This is stuff that's important that we need to talk about. What have I told you? Maybe everybody else understands something you don't. I don't want you to internalize it because that's a brutal place to live on a psychological level. Especially in a city like Los Angeles or Hollywood where success is constantly visible. And maybe that's why places like Skid Row feel so important to understanding California, honestly. Not because Skid Row defines Los Angeles. It doesn't. But because it interrupts the fantasy of Los Angeles. You can spend an entire day surrounded by wealth, glamour, visibility, and aspiration, and then encounter a completely different reality, only blocks away. Addiction, mental illness, poverty, isolation. People who have fallen through every crack the system had. That contrast hits hard. Because California stops feeling like a movie and starts feeling real. What are people actually looking for? Because fame isn't really the goal. Money isn't really the goal. Visibility isn't really the goal. Those are usually standing in for something much deeper. Belonging, purpose, connection, significance, love. The feeling that your life matters. That's what people are chasing. California simply provides 1,000 different ways to chase it. Some healthy, some destructive, some beautiful, some heartbreaking. But underneath all of them sits the same longing, the same hope, the same question. Will the next version of me finally be enough? And that's where reinvention becomes dangerous. Because if fulfillment is always attached to a future version of yourself, you never get to make peace with the person standing right in front of the mirror that you're looking in. Right here, right now. The search never ends. The transformation never feels complete. The horizon keeps moving. And eventually, people can spend so much time becoming that they forgot how to simply be. That's the cost California rarely puts on the postcard. Not failure, not success. The possibility that somewhere along the way, you become so focused on creating the next version of yourself that you lose sight of the one who started the journey in the first place. Think about it. You're listening to The Midnight Drive. You know, after all of this thought about what happens in Los Angeles and Hollywood and everything that's going on in that part of California, whenever I travel there, I now have to wonder if maybe that's why I keep coming back to the coastline. Not Hollywood, not the desert, not the mansions or the studios, but the coastline. Because after everything that we've talked about tonight, the Pacific feels different. Almost like it's operating on an entirely different set of rules. You can spend days immersed in California's reinvention machine. The networking, the branding, the visibility, the ambition, performance, searching, the endless pursuit of whatever's coming next. And then you find yourself standing beside the ocean. And suddenly, none of it feels quite as important. Not meaningless, but just smaller. And that's weird, isn't it? Because the Pacific Ocean doesn't seem interested in your resume. It doesn't care how many followers you have. It doesn't care whether or not you're famous. It doesn't care whether your startup succeeded. It doesn't care whether your screenplay sold. It doesn't care whether or not you're enlightened or connected or visible or important. The ocean just keeps doing what it's always done. Wave after wave. Tide after tide, year after year. Long before California became California, long before Hollywood, long before the gold rush, long before the first studio executive convinced the world that dreams could be manufactured, the ocean was already there. And perhaps that's why it feels so honest. Because unlike almost everything that we've discussed this week, the Pacific Ocean isn't trying to become anything. It already is. That sounds so simple, doesn't it? Almost too simple, though. And I think that's why so many people find themselves drawn toward the coastline. Especially after spending time in Los Angeles. The city pulls people outward. The ocean pulls people inward. The way I said that sounds a little menacing. The ocean pulls people inward. Anyways, Los Angeles is asking, who are you becoming? The coastline asks, who are you when you stop trying to become anything? Those are very different questions. And maybe that's why the drives along the Pacific Coast Highway feel so different from the rest of California. The scenery is beautiful, sure. But beauty alone doesn't explain it. There's something else happening. Perspective. You start noticing how small the human drama becomes compared to the horizon. The celebrity scandals, the networking events, the social media performance, the comparisons, the endless pressure to optimize and reinvent and improve. They don't disappear, but they lose some of their authority. Because standing beside the ocean has a way of reminding people that existence is much larger than whatever story they're currently trapped in. And maybe that's what California has been wrestling with all along. The tension between becoming and being. This entire week really has been about that tension. The Cecil Hotel. People arriving, hoping to become somebody else. Hollywood forever. People becoming symbols larger than themselves. The Integratron. People searching for transcendence beyond themselves. Every story pointed toward transformation. Every story toward reinvention. Every story pointed toward longing. And longing isn't necessarily a bad thing. Longing is what built California. It built Hollywood. It built entire industries. Longing artists to create. Longing drove entrepreneurs to build. Explorers to travel. Dreamers to risk everything. Without longing, a lot of beautiful things never would have happened. But longing becomes dangerous when it convinces people that fulfillment only exists somewhere else, somewhere ahead, somewhere beyond the horizon, the next achievement, the next relationship, the next opportunity, the next version of yourself. Because eventually the search itself becomes a habit, and habits are difficult to break, especially when an entire culture keeps reinforcing them. California may be the most powerful reinforcement system for longing that's ever been created. A place where every billboard, every movie, every success story, every influencer, every celebrity, every startup, every spiritual retreat seems to whisper the same things. There's more. Keep going, keep becoming, keep searching. And maybe that's why the coastline feels so important emotionally, because it offers a different message. It's not a louder message. It's not a more exciting message. It's just a different one. One that sounds something like, you don't have to earn this sunset. You don't have to become somebody special to stand where you're standing. You don't need followers. You don't need status. You don't need a breakthrough. You don't need reinvention. The waves arrive whether you're successful or not. The horizon stretches outward whether you've figured your life out or not. The ocean doesn't ask for a performance. It doesn't ask for a pitch. It doesn't ask for a better version of yourself. It simply exists. Isn't there something really comforting about that? And maybe that's the lesson I keep finding in California. Not that reinvention is wrong or bad. Not that dreams aren't worth chasing. They absolutely are. But somewhere between Hollywood and the desert, between the dreamers and the seekers, between the people trying to become somebody and the people trying to become something more, it's worth remembering something surprisingly simple. You are allowed to stop searching for just a moment. You are allowed to stand still. You are allowed to watch the sun disappear into the Pacific and exist exactly as you are. And maybe that's the one thing California doesn't try very hard to sell, which is precisely why it might be the most valuable thing the state has to offer.